This episode is brought to you by the One Love Foundation. Many stories on true crime podcasts start with abusive relationships. The numbers of people affected by relationship abuse are startling. Over 1 in 3 women, nearly 1 in 3 men, and over 1 in 2 trans non-binary people will be in an abusive relationship in their lifetimes. Abusive relationships rarely start with physical abuse. Instead, there are often red flags like manipulation, isolation, belittling, and volatility. Not all unhealthy relationships become abusive, but all abusive relationships start out as unhealthy ones. One Love Foundation, a national nonprofit dedicated to ending relationship abuse and creating a world of healthier relationships, wants to empower you to see the signs of an unhealthy relationship before things go too far. Go to joinonelove.org to see the signs and know how to help a friend who may be in an unhealthy relationship. That's joinonelove.org and learn how to spot the signs of unhealthy and healthy relationship behaviors. Hi, I'm Yue Xu.
And I'm Julie Kravchik.
This is the Dateable Podcast,
where we dive into everything about modern dating and relationships.
Welcome to the show. Hi, Dateables. Welcome to another episode of Dateable Podcast. Have we all recovered from all the candy we had from Valentine's Day last week?
I may have eaten my big box that I got in 3 days. Not proud of that moment. But I haven't gone for half off candy yet.
I haven't either.
That's a win.
Yeah, I need to get on that train. Went to my parents' house the day before Valentine's Day. My mom had the little candy hearts. I haven't seen those in years, like since grade school.
Either.
And I asked her where she got it, and she said it was some like real estate agent that was passing them out. So unromantic. I was hoping she'd be like, your dad.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I know, just some real estate agent.
See, love comes from everywhere.
Yes.
Even real estate agents.
Especially when you're trying to make some money from house sales.
Exactly. Love bombing all the way.
How was your V-Day?
It was good. I'm actually continuing it this weekend. So
Nice.
This is before I'm going. We're doing this intro right before. So we're doing a belated dinner when, things quiet down a little. But we actually did in the middle of the week. It was Tuesday, as you all know, this year. We did gifts and I was super cheesy. I can share what I did. I have been waiting for a moment that I could let my cheese flag fly.
Oh boy.
Use that.
I don't know how I feel about cheese flag, but yeah, wave that cheese flag.
So we did, just before I go into the cheesiness, we did another type of cheesiness. We made chicken parm, like a homemade version that
delicious.
is actually pretty labor intensive, and it's a special occasion type of meal. So we usually do Taco Tuesdays. We decided to,
level
up a little. Level up, exactly. So my cheesiness is I had this idea, and I feel like it was inspired by something on this podcast, probably. I actually think I remember the episode from like way back in the day when we had David Cruz on the podcast.
Oh, I love him.
Yes, he was from The Millionaire Matchmaker, and he was just so sweet. And he talked about just like, how you can inject romance. And I feel like I've had this idea for so long, but haven't had the need to do it yet. So what I did was I bought Post-it notes. And I wrote 50 things I loved about my partner and put them all over the house.
Oh, that is so cute.
And then the last one was a card with a rose, a single rose. Because I don't know, I like giving on Valentine's Day just as much as receiving. And I don't believe like it should be just women that are receiving on Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Oh, that's very cute. I don't think it's cheesy. I think it's very sweet.
And then I got a big orchid. My partner always likes to get me orchids, and a few of them have not made it, hence the need for new orchids every so often. So it is a massive one, and also got chocolates. He was hiding the orchid in the closet. I did not see it for days, which was pretty good. So I was impressed, like, not going to shame anyone. Of course, even if you go out day of and you get your stuff, that's still good. I still commend anyone that does what they need to do to give their person some love. But I did like that he did it a few days early. That makes me happy. You're not like one of the last minute people scrambling.
That's very sweet. I love that. That's very cute. Which also brings up this issue that I've been running into. Is like, how do you surprise each other when you live together? It's really hard to hide things.
I know. I also live in a one bed. He said that. He's like, I realized how limited of options there are to like hide things, which, maybe is good for the long haul, right? That you're not hiding things from each other. But yeah, it is very difficult. What about you? What was your Valentine's Day like?
It was super romantic. Stomach virus that's been going around.
I thought you were being serious for a minute. I was like, oh.
It was a really, really romantic
stomach
day.
bug. Oh my God.
The norovirus, is that what it's called? Anyway.
Nothing says Valentine's Day like a stomach bug.
Like showing it from both ends,
That's how you test the love of your partner. Will they stay with you?
Right. Yes. Some things you can't hide when you live together. So that was fun. But we did go see a show as a one-woman play called Christina Wong, Sweatshop Overlord. It's a play about this performance artist who during COVID started this mask making initiative with a bunch of aunties, or she calls them aunties, however you want to say it, but like these older women all across the US volunteering their time to make masks during COVID. And she goes through everything that happened from the day of lockdown to today. And there's some things that like I totally forgot, like the fires. I totally forgot the fires happened.
There's a lot we've suppressed on purpose, yes.
I feel like everything happened in 2020, the elections. It was just such a weird year. And she goes through all that, but then from the lens of her little apartment where she's organizing this huge initiative of making masks. And it went from like making 2 masks in the beginning to like by the end they made over 300,000 masks and sent it to people who really needed them. So it was a really touching story, but she told it from a really funny lens. And in it, she talks about how she's like, should I have spent my time trying to have children instead of like being a performance artist? And now during COVID, now that I'm thinking about having children, I can't because I can't even leave my house. So all the things that come up, I think it was very relatable, all the things that come up for you. We got these tickets a long time ago, but it just happened to fall on Valentine's Day.
That's nice, though.
Yeah, it was good.
It's nice to have like an activity planned.
Yes, definitely. And we had a chicken noodle soup for our tummies, so we had a very nice meal there.
I was like, you survived the play with the stomach bug. That's an accomplishment.
But I will say this. Every year I say, don't like Valentine's Day. I don't want to celebrate it. And now after this year's Valentine's Day came and went, I feel like I want to celebrate it now. I like what you did with your partner, just a gesture of love and romance, I think goes a long way. It doesn't have to be something grand. You don't have to make a plan, but maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm going to bring this up to my partner next year. Maybe we get each other a homemade gift of some sort or, I think a gesture is nice and I'm going to bring that up. Every year I'm like, I'm cool. I hate the day. I don't need to celebrate. And this year I had a little FOMO. It's like, I think we should celebrate it because what's the difference between you being in love with someone and like you not being in love with someone is that you want to show that love, right? And if you have an opportunity to show it, I want to take that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I'm very excited for Omakase tonight. That's going to be amazing. So one of my favorite places, my partner made this reservation a few weeks back, which was really sweet. And very excited about that. So don't want to undermine that. But I did really like doing just like the at-home version because it felt very chill. And it felt like what you were saying, an opportunity to connect. We also have gotten these games that this was really fun. This is not an ad. I wish they were a paid sponsor, but they're not. It's called Happily. Have you ever heard of this? It's for couples. Basically, it's at-home date nights. You get a box every month. There was intro to salsa dancing that was part of this one, an ice cream making kit, and a game of questions like how well do you know your partner. So we did the salsa dance for like 10 minutes out of 20 and then we abandoned ship on it. And we did not do the ice cream because we're going to save it because I do actually have an ice cream maker. But we did do the card game and it was super fun. And some of them were really obvious. Like there were questions like, what was the worst worst part of your first date. Some of them, they did like bring things up that I'm like, this is questionable. It was like reminded us of like fights we got into. We're like, maybe they shouldn't be putting that like on this game for people. Don't need to go there, you know? It's like, what was your first fight about? And there was some, though, that were really funny that it was like, for example, my partner got one that was, if you could be any movie star to like play your life, who would it be? So he had like, basically he had to answer for himself. And then we swap cards. And you could put like tiles on them to bet. So if you thought you knew the answer to one, you would put more tiles on that. And you had to get rid of all your tiles. Or you could only put 3 max on one, except for the lightning round where you could put all 10 tiles on a card. So it was very exciting, really, but it was funny because like some of them like we're like, we don't even know the answer for ourselves. Like, how are you going to guess this? But others were obvious.
That's really fun. It's like the newlywed game.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun. So I think just doing stuff like that and spending the night in, you know, I sometimes feel like just watching TV is our default, and it's not a great default in my opinion. It's just too easy, right? But I do really like these nights where you can stay in, cook a nice meal together, play a game like this, really talk over dinner, like eat at the kitchen table, like the dining room table, not at the TV. Like I really enjoy that.
Yeah. It's the difference between quality time and time spent together. They're very different. So differentiating the two is so important in a relationship. It's so important when you're dating, especially if you're trying to get sexy, right? Relating it back to our episode. And we've talked about this in previous episodes with Emily Nagoski about what turns people on. And a lot of the time, it's your environment. It's the working up to the moment. Like for me, for instance, I cannot get turned on right away if it's like too hot in my apartment or if it's too hot anywhere. There are just certain things that you have to set up. And I think having quality time before intimacy turns me on so much. It makes me feel connected to my partner.
Yeah, and we even talk about it on this episode about the TV example and how that could be detrimental. You get tired, the last thing you want to do is have sex. But, you know, I feel like we've had a lot of sex conversations on this podcast, but every time I learn something different. This is based on the book that just came out that we got an advance copy for. And this is the book called Sex Talks by Vanessa Marin, who is a sex therapist, and then her husband, Xander. So we have both of them on the podcast. It's just the way they even introduce Xander as the husband, as the guy, right? But the two of them, by sharing just honest conversations and ways they approach sex, and you'll hear through their story that even for sex therapists, sometimes it can be hard to have sex, especially in long-term relationships. This conversation was just really great in the sense that it brought to light the fact that we're often so afraid to talk about sex, but you can do it in a way that doesn't feel so confrontational. I feel like in the past when we've had conversations about talking about sex, it's always when there's something wrong, and they get ahead of it so much.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Sex is such a sensitive topic for so many people. And especially when you're single, you forget sometimes. I remember just being single and being like, once I'm in a relationship, we're going to be having sex all the time because it's there and, you know, I'll never be short of sex. And then you get in a relationship, you realize there's so much more to it. And if you don't talk about it, you end up just inserting your own assumptions into what you think is happening. And that is the ultimate sex killer, is when you are assuming what your partner's thinking or wanting to do.
Yeah, this episode is great. Like, no matter your relationship status, like last week's episode, Single and Happy, we still said it was applicable for people that are in relationships. And same for this. Even if you feel like you're in a dry spell currently, I think just talking about it gets you a little revved up too. And that could translate to just the way your vibe and energy is out in the universe. But also, we talk about non-creepy ways to talk about sex even even early on. Non-creepy is the key word.
Key word, yes. So we'll get into this conversation. First, I just want to say thank you to everyone who attended the public happy hour in our Facebook group. It was a great turnout, and apparently a member of our community revealed his girlfriend
Ooh.
to the group. It was like a first reveal. We've actually had that happen 2 or 3 other times, right? Someone brought their significant other onto a happy hour.
So funny. And also, we are sad that our Finding Your Person program registration has closed, but we are excited for all the people that joined. And hopefully we'll have another opening in a couple months. We like to do this, when we can be fully attuned and helpful to everyone. So thanks again for everyone that joined, and we'll see you in the program. For everyone else, you can always get on the waiting list. Still open, and you'll be first to know when program reopens.
So just go to findingyourperson.com.
Perfect. And at Dateable Podcast, that's where we are on Instagram. Even though the season has already opened, there is a really fun season opener video. So if you haven't seen that yet, go to Instagram. You could see it. And yeah, I think that's all for announcements. Always, I'll give a last plug. Leave us a rating and review. We're really trying to get to 1K, and we're almost there. Not quite, but we're going to get there soon. So your review will help, especially if you leave 5 stars. And if you don't want to write anything, that's okay. Just hit the 5 stars. That's totally fine too. Still counts. Okay, well, before we get into it, let's hear a message from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by the One Love Foundation. The numbers of people affected by relationship abuse are startling. Abusive relationships rarely start with physical abuse. Instead, there are often red flags like manipulation, isolation, belittling, and volatility. Do you know the signs? One Love Foundation, a national nonprofit dedicated to ending relationship abuse, empowers you to see the signs of an unhealthy relationship before things go too far. Visit joinonelove.org and learn to spot the signs of unhealthy and healthy relationship behaviors.
Okay, let's hear it from Vanessa and Xander.
Sex. One of our favorite topics. Sex, sex, sex. But we also want to know what happens behind closed doors for couples. It's something that over brunch, maybe your friends don't really bring up, like what their sex life is like. But it's something that is always top of mind, especially if you're new in a relationship or even 10 years into a relationship. The topic of sex always comes up. So we got a sexpert couple with us today, Vanessa and Xander Marin. Vanessa's a sex therapist with 20 years of experience, and Xander is just a regular dude. I love that that's how you introduce yourself on the show. Just a regular dude, but you're really not. You're not just a regular dude. They're the hosts of Pillow Talks podcast and authors of the book Sex Talks. I'm holding it right now. That just came out, and it's a #1 new release on Amazon in the sex and sexuality category. Congratulations on that, as I'm holding your labor of love here. They're both in their late 30s. They live in Santa Barbara, originally from California, and they are married to each other. Just want to clarify. Welcome, Vanessa and Xander.
Welcome.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having us. We're so excited to be here.
So congratulations on the book and congratulations on the podcast as well. I feel like I intimately know both of you, and I realize you don't know me. So you probably have so many of these people who've been hearing all about your intimate details. But I had this burning question this whole time is, Xander, when did you know that Vanessa was a sex therapist? At what point was this information divulged?
Well, I think that I knew from pretty much the very beginning. When we met, Vanessa hadn't gone to grad school yet for psychotherapy, so she wasn't practicing, but it was her career aspiration. And I probably found that out first date, I'm going to guess. I'm sure we talked about that. So yeah, I always knew that was something that she wanted to do. Yeah, it wasn't until maybe 4 or 5 years into our relationship that she really started practicing that on a daily basis. But yeah, it was always an exciting thing. Like, it's cool to be able to tell my friends that I'm dating a future sex therapist.
But be honest, it made you a little nervous too, right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. That's what I wanted to know. Was there an intimidation factor
at all?
Vanessa beat me to the butt The but was that it was intimidating because I was like, it's fun to talk about sex that other couples are having or issues that other people are having. But I kind of always knew like at some point I was going to have to get honest about my own stuff. I was going to have to confront my own issues or our own issues. And that was scary at first.
I can only imagine. I'm intimidated talking to Vanessa, and I'm not even having sex with Vanessa. And then, Vanessa, for you, when you started your research and your studies and then practicing, did you have any of your personal rules around sex? Because I know you two had sex on your second or third date, debatable which one.
Yes.
I know there was a debate about that. But quite early on in your relationship, did you have any of those rules that so many of us have?
I tried not to have any hard and fast rules about my sex life. I just found that each situation was so unique. Each relationship was so unique that if I went into it with these rules that I felt like I had to adhere to, it was actually harder for me to tune into myself and what my needs felt like in those situations. So in general, I'm not a big fan of rules that we have to stick by.
And I definitely didn't go into our first date with any rules in mind. Honestly, I was not looking for a serious relationship. I wasn't expecting to fall into a serious relationship. And so it was really just more of a let's see what happens kind of thing. And very quickly, I very visibly saw that it was more than just a let's see what happens situation. Like we were pretty well matched and it turned very quickly into a very serious relationship.
Interesting. Like, do you remember what that like moment was that you said, okay, like this is more?
It really just felt like it was some of those early days. So one of the things that I appreciated so much about Xander is that there wasn't this sense of playing games with each other. And I think that's very often what the rules end up feeling like in the moment is it feels like playing games. So that night that we met, we had this furious makeout session. We were up for hours. He walked me home at the end of the night and he just said, I want to see you. What are you doing tomorrow? And it felt so exciting to me to have, here's somebody who's not trying to do this whole thing of the rules of, oh, I've got to play it cool and wait a couple of days to call her. We ended up being way too tired and a little hungover to hang out the next day. But it was just so refreshing to hear him say, like, I like you. I want to see you again. When can I see you next?
So we went out on our first date the night after.
Yeah, 2 days later.
First official date. Yes.
As quickly as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, we met on a Saturday and we had dates Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And it just felt like I appreciate that he wants to see me. He's making that time to see me. And that's, I think, what helped move the relationship forward so quickly. Both of us were just like, we like each other. We want to keep hanging out. Yeah. Why should we play any games and pretend that we don't?
Why is it that difficult and not easy? But as we know, sex, I feel like, is one of those things you think is supposed to be easy, but it's not always, which is why you wrote this book, why you have the podcast, why you do the work that you do. I guess, like, I'm curious. We always wonder, like, what goes on behind closed doors. And like you were saying earlier, like at brunch, you don't talk about sex, especially when it's not going well. What are some of the things you've heard, like, as the most common challenges that couples face with sex?
Yeah, we're just not having these open conversations, even with our friends. If we do talk about sex, I think a lot of us feel this desire to make it seem like it's perfect, especially once we get into a relationship. So it's one thing when you're dating someone casually, you might say like, oh yeah, it was really good or it was not good. Right. We might go into more details about what happened. But once you're in a relationship with somebody and you want your friends to like them, you want them to think that the relationship is going well and everything's good, we don't want to give those sensitive details anymore. So we hear from so many people who tell us, I am not even honest with my closest friends about what's really going on in our bedroom. So the biggest complaints that we hear about from people are feeling low desire, and that goes really hand in hand with feeling like there's mismatched libidos in the relationship. Like, I want it way less than my partner wants it. We're like arguing about how frequently we should have it. And then on men's behalf, we hear a lot about performance anxiety. anxiety. I'm
Yeah.
struggling to get hard, stay hard, have an orgasm at the right time, generally feeling anxious about sex. And pretty similarly for women, we hear that same anxiety about, am I good? Is my partner enjoying it? And a lot of women having problems with orgasm specifically. Like,
am I taking too long?
Women who have never had an orgasm, or maybe they can get there on their own, but really struggle to get there with a partner. So those would be the top 3 things that we hear about.
Sounds about right. And I feel like all of that, it's a very lonely place to be when you think there may be something wrong in your sex life and you have nobody to talk to about it. And I think a lot of times with our friends too, you feel like the default of a healthy relationship is a healthy sex life. You just assume people
Definitely
are just banging all the time because they look so happy. It must be so great. And I recently had a conversation with a girlfriend of mine who has a very high sex drive. And she's like, my goal is twice a week. And I'm like, that is so achievable. I did not know that was your goal. I thought she was like twice a day, you know? So we have all these misconceptions about people.
Yeah.
Why do you think talking about sex would help alleviate some of these problems?
We all build up these stories in our heads of what everybody else's sex lives look like and what our sex lives are supposed to look like. And if we don't talk about those stories openly, especially with the person that we are having sex with, then it's so likely that there's going to be miscommunication, misunderstanding about what we actually need and want. So for example, like if Xander and I never talk about how often do we want to be having sex, what feels good in our relationship, we could very easily misunderstand each other. Maybe he thinks like you, like, oh, we're supposed to be doing it twice a day, and that stresses him out and feels like way too much. But I'm over here thinking, oh, like twice a week would sound totally great to me.
Yeah, I mean, the example you gave was such a good example where you had a limited amount of information. You know that this friend of yours has a higher sex drive, or maybe she's mentioned like, oh, I have a pretty high sex drive. And then it turns into a story in your mind. And the same thing happens with us. Like in a lot of partnerships, you might not talk about sex very much, but you probably have an idea of like, oh yeah, I think my partner has a higher sex drive than I do, or they've mentioned that they have a high sex drive, but that's all of the conversation you have. And it's going to be so easy to jump to this conclusion of it's not going to be good enough unless they're getting it every day or twice a day, when in reality, maybe they want it once a week.
And it can also be other aspects of your sex life too. Maybe there's this move that your partner thinks you love and it works so well for you. And you're over here thinking,
you're like, please stop.
My partner's doing the move on me again. I hate it.
Not the boob honk again.
Oh, yes.
So
definitely been
the
there.
two of you, I think your story is really fascinating. Kind of, you've been together a while. You've gone through periods where maybe there wasn't as much sex as you would have hoped. Could you share a little bit about your own story and how that's fed into the work you do?
So it was hot and heavy between the two of us when we first met, those back-to-back dates. We were really into each other. And then we went through what pretty much every relationship goes through. You've been together for a little while. You start getting more comfortable with each other. Life starts catching up to you and you start having less and less sex. So we share our story in the book and we say, there's nothing remarkable about what happened to us, nothing completely out of the ordinary. It's something that we all go through. We hit that period in a relationship where it just starts feeling harder and more complicated. And so for us, it did feel like this huge stumbling block of, wow, it used to feel so easy at the beginning. And now it's feeling so hard. And even though I was already on this career path, pursuing sex therapy, I was looking for resources and just feeling like there was nothing out there. So it was this sense of exactly what you were saying before, Yue, of like feeling alone in it, feeling like, oh my gosh, we must be the only couple that are going through this. And this added little imposter syndrome for me of I'm studying to do this
to be an expert
figure
here,
it out in
right?
my own relationship.
I mean, and for me as a guy, there was this like, well, I'm a man. I'm supposed to want sex all the time. How can this be a problem when it feels like everything else in our relationship is right? Like, how is it that I am not wanting it enough? Is there something wrong with me me as a man, like I immediately jumped to like, oh, like there must be something wrong with my hormone levels or my testosterone or whatever it is. But that kept me from looking at all the other things going on. Like, how is my fitness? How is my emotional well-being? How is my workload? Like I was working myself to the bone at, 23, 24 years old, trying to get ahead, not doing any exercise, really not feeling very good about myself at all. And then like the little time I did have off of work was like at home lying on the couch with Vanessa. And it's like, that just wasn't a good situation for me to feel very fired up with my sex drive.
So is there a time, because like I'm thinking the honeymoon period, right, is when you're hot and heavy. And I've seen it in my relationship too. It's like you get comfortable with each other and you don't need to prove it as much. So like the whole thing, is there a set time or does it really like vary couple to couple?
The honeymoon period will typically last for about 6 to 12 months, sometimes up to 2 years. But even neurochemically, like the neurotransmitters that are being released in our brains when we're meeting a new person, falling in love with them, those can only last for about 6 to 12 months. So it's not just that life gets more complicated and, all these other factors come into play. It's also like our brains are not physically capable of maintaining that level of intensity for longer than a year max.
Interesting.
That makes a lot of sense. I used to just blame it on life happening, which you're saying it is a contributor to all of it, but we're just also not built to be hot and heavy forever. That's good because then we'd be exhausted. So that's good to know, right?
Yeah. It's like you need to do other stuff than just fuck, basically.
But then at what point in your sex life is it a problem?
It's different for every couple. I mean, some couples will get into that slowdown and feel like, okay, this just feels like the natural progression. We're all right with this. For us, it felt like a pretty sudden and intense change, and it didn't feel healthy. It didn't feel normal. So for us, it did feel like a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it really felt like a big elephant in the room. Like, I think that that's kind of a good barometer. Like, does it feel like there's a lot going unspoken between you? Is there this kind of big awkward thing where it's like we kind of know this is an issue, but we don't want to acknowledge it? And that was absolutely what was going on for the two of us. But yeah, I mean, there are, like Vanessa said, there's plenty of couples where it's like, okay, yeah, those first couple months were exhausting and now we're ready to slow down and we're totally happy with that. Like if that happens, that's great. Like you guys are on the same page. I mean, it's good still to be able to acknowledge that, hey, are we both still feeling on the same page about, the way that things are, we're easing into a new pattern. And as long as you're cool with that, then awesome. Like you're on the same page. But yeah, for us, we were struggling to have conversations about whether we were on the same page, and doing so, it was pretty clear that we weren't on the same page.
So how long did you kind of dance around this until you decided to talk about it?
It took months. And, I was the one who was wanting to talk about it more. I was wanting us to go to therapy and try to figure out what to do. And Xander was really hesitant. He wasn't ready. And so that's something that we talk about in the book, acknowledging that couples are always going to be on different timelines with this. It would be great if, one person could say, hey, can we go to therapy? And the other person's like, I'm right there with you. Let's do it. But that's just so rare. So we've been through that, of what it was like to have one partner wanting to work on it and the other not. And wanted to give resources for couples who are in that same situation.
And then how did it finally happen? How did the conversations start flowing?
I kept telling Xander that I wanted to go to therapy. And so eventually it took a couple of months, to be honest. And it was a painful period of time for us. But we did end up going to therapy. And to be totally honest with you, like it was fine. We got like a few resources and a few tools. And it ended up being like just enough to get the ball rolling for us. But we realized through many, many years of like continuing to have these conversations and building up this business together, we started to realize, there's got to be a better way to it. We need more resources about how to have these conversations.
Oh, yeah, because I mean, and one of those reasons is that typically, a couple goes to a marriage and family therapist, and, you assume like marriage and family therapist, like sex has got to be a normal topic. But the reality is, I mean, like, how much education in sex did you have to get your MFT?
Yeah, to become licensed as a therapist, I had to do a 1-unit class on
That's
human sexuality, where basically all we did was learn the proper anatomical names for things. That's a penis. That's a vagina. Great.
Wow.
You passed your 1-unit class.
Yeah. So unfortunately, so we learned that, oh yeah, most therapists themselves are not super comfortable talking about this because there aren't a lot of resources out there. And that's,
Therapists are human too.
Partially the inspiration for us doing what we're doing.
We've talked about this before in podcast episodes that, like, even in 2023, we still can't talk about sex. Like, for whatever reason, it's still taboo. Like, I guess what made you decide to talk to someone, a therapist, like go down that route versus try on your own to have those conversations? Was it just going in circles? Did you not know where to start? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, I started initiating those conversations and it just went in circles because I was asking, like, what I can see now is I was asking the wrong questions. I was asking things like, why don't you ever want to have sex with me? Why aren't we having sex very often? And those kinds of questions obviously, would just put him on the defensive, make him feel like he's the problem. There's something that he needs to fix about himself, which of course felt very scary and made you want to shut down and not want to talk about it more. So I tried myself and then realized this isn't going anywhere. And as somebody who was training to be a therapist, I thought, okay, let's see if therapy can be a better model. But yeah, it was still a struggle for us.
Yeah. And I think in therapy, our therapist was able to help us try to look at it as more of a team effort that was going to be required, that it's not just when this is happening, it's never just one person's problem that they need to fix.
Right.
And it's really easy for us to get into that headspace where it's like, hey, I'm not the problem, you're the problem.
Right.
Go fix the problem and then we'll be good. But that's not what a partnership is all about. Like a partnership, it's a partnership. Like you have to do things together. And so it was really helpful for us to have that reframe of, oh, okay, this is something that both of us can work on. It's not just a matter of like, oh, I want sex less than she does right now in this season of life. And I just need to find a way to, boost that desire.
Well, I feel like this is such an essential conversation because the reframe is what will get us out of this guilt mindset. Like, I'm the one with less sexual desire. I feel so guilty about that. I should really find ways to be more sexually active. But I thought this was so fascinating. 73% of your Instagram audience said that they wanted higher sex drive, but then very few of them wanted to do something about it. And when you ask, why do you want a higher sex drive? Most people were saying that they wanted to please their partner or they want to bring up their sex drive so that they can be at an equal level. There was a lot of just guilt and responsibility tied to it. Can you give us more of these learnings? Because I was like, this is eye-opening.
Damn.
We're taught to believe that the higher the sex drive, the better. The more sex we're having, the better. And definitely if you feel like there's a mismatch in your relationship, the person with the lower sex drive very often blames themselves. It's my fault. And so we always like to say there is no one correct sex drive that everybody should be having. And it's really important for us to dig deeper into this. It's easy to say, yeah, I want to have a higher sex drive. There's so many things in life that we would want if we could just snap our fingers and get it. But we want to dig deeper and identify what are the actual root causes that are going on. So with sex drive, there are so many factors that can affect it. And we need to have that curiosity about it. So here's one great example. Our desire for sex is very heavily tied into our enjoyment of sex. And this is something that so many people do not connect until they hear it laid out like that. Like if you're having sex that feels routine, kind of predictable, if it feels like it's more about your partner's pleasure than for you, there's very little in it for you, why would you crave that experience?
Right.
So if you look at couples who have a mismatch in desire, very often what is at the root of the issue is that there's a mismatch in the level of pleasure that they're getting from the sex they're having.
And no one wants to ever say that. It's just the other person's problem, right?
Exactly. So that is, of course, a sensitive conversation. A lot of people then leap ahead to, oh my God, now I have to go tell my partner, like, you suck at sex and you need to get better. Like, that is not our advice. Don't worry. There are plenty of ways. That's why the whole fourth conversation in Sex Talks is all about pleasure. We wanted to give exercise exercises and frameworks for couples to explore what brings them pleasure and talk about it in ways that feel fun and exciting rather than critical.
I think one of the big problems, though, is that, everyone wants to know, like, okay, well, like, what do we do if our desires are mismatched? And so then we start talking about the desire enjoyment connection. And then you quickly understand and go, oh, okay, I see what's going on, but this is way too complicated of a conversation to have. And so, I mean, that's one of the big reasons why we wrote this book, because we were like, okay, these are really important conversations to have, but these can't be the first conversations that you have. That's way too hard. And so we try to back it way, way up in our book and start with really, really simple things, like just simply acknowledging that, hey, sex is a thing and we have it. Let's start talking positively about sex. Let's talk about the fact that it's something that we do. Let's give each other some simple, basic compliments about sex, just so that we start feeling more comfortable with sex as like an everyday topic of conversation. And so that way sex becomes a safe topic, and then we can start building on those conversations until we can get to that pleasure conversation and really kind of get to, the meat or the heart of it.
So I want to go through that because that's the core of your book, right? And I know, Vanessa, you said that when you first had the conversation, you asked all the wrong things and you went about it in not the best way. So clearly these 5 essential talks that you're putting out there in the book is what you learned from that experience and all your work. Can you kind of walk us through the 5 and why they're so important?
Yeah, so we came up with the 5 conversations that we think every couple needs to have in order to have extraordinary sex. And we laid them out in a really specific order that we think is going to be the most approachable and the most fun. So in the book, we start with acknowledgement. Sex is a thing. We have it. We're getting comfortable with it as a topic of conversation. Then we move into connection. What do we need to feel emotionally connected to each other throughout the day so that we feel that openness to be intimate with each other? Next is desire. What do we each need to feel turned on, to feel excited about being intimate? Then we have pleasure. What do we need to enjoy the experience to make sure it's satisfactory for both of us? And then finally, we have exploration. What do we want to try next?
Oh, I like that because it progresses.
Exactly.
To the next time, which is very nice because you have something to look forward to. So I'm getting this right. First, you set the foundation, creating a safe space to talk about sex, which I think is a step many couples miss. I've certainly missed that in previous relationships. It's almost like you go straight into, what are your fetishes? What are your kinks? What are you into? You want to do this upside down? You want to try this new toy?
Exactly.
It's like, whoa. Let's
go to step 1.
Let's talk about the sex that we're having first. And then you start building upon that with how do we start talking about having sex with each other? Then how do we start wanting to have sex with each other? And how do we make it the best sexual experience possible so that we keep wanting more? So you just keep building and building and building. I really love that. I understand acknowledgement, talking about sex is a thing. What are the ways that couples can connect better with each other as the second step?
Yeah, I love that you gave that example because that is a big issue that a lot of couples come up against is that we jump right into the deep end with the what's your fantasy and what's your kinks, or we wait until there's a really big problem with our sex life. And just like I went into it with Xander, why are we not doing this? Why don't you want me? And it only makes sex feel like this dangerous and, unsafe conversation to have, or not a fun one, certainly. So that's why we start with acknowledgement. And then we move into emotional connection next, because a lot of us have this tendency to compartmentalize our sex life. We think of sex as like, that's just that thing that we do in the bedroom at night. We don't need to talk about it. But the reality is that our desire for sex is very highly tied into how connected we feel to our partner on a day-to-day basis. And especially in long-term relationships, so many couples tell us, we feel like we've moved more into roommates rather than romantic partners. We don't spend very much quality time together. We're kind of like 2 ships passing in the night. So if you're feeling so disconnected from your partner, the idea of leaping into having sex with them feels very jarring. It feels kind of scary even sometimes. We're so disconnected. Why would I want to go to that maximum level of connection? So we wanted to help couples come up with very practical and easy ways to keep that connection going throughout the day. So not only are you going to feel more open to having sex, but your relationship is just also going to feel better too.
I think one of the things that's interesting that you said is that we put sex in like its own corner and don't think about it. We do this podcast about modern dating, and a lot of people that aren't in relationships, like they're thinking there's so many other hurdles I have to get over to find a partner, and now I have to worry about like sex not being good too. And I can hear people saying that, and I think that's why a lot of times we avoid it. I think also like avoid the conversation because it's challenging. But like, why do you think it is so important to have these talks when things haven't gotten to the place of just like really bad? You're coming now from like a place of defensiveness.
You're gonna get to a tough point with your sex life at some point in your relationship. It's pretty inevitable. Every couple has some sort of hang up. And if we don't have that foundation of talking about sex from the earlier parts of a relationship, it's going to be so much harder to have those tough conversations when they do come up. And not only that, but the point that we really want to make in the book is that talking about sex can be fun. It can feel very sexy. It can feel flirtatious. It can bring back that feeling of the butterflies that we miss from those early stages of our relationship. So it's not that it's this thing that we all have to work on and, okay, I'm going to talk about sex just like I'm going to brush my teeth twice a day and make sure I'm flossing. But it's actually an enjoyable intimacy building experience.
And I also think like if you are in the very early stages of a relationship or if you're dating, picking up this book and getting an understanding of what these conversations are, the way that we have it laid out at the beginning, they're very easy and approachable conversations that you could just very casually slip into conversation. It's a great way as you're getting to know them in terms of like, what are their interests? What are they into? Do our values align? You can also kind of be gauging like, does our sexual compatibility align? And as you weave those conversations into getting to know someone, like you are already setting that foundation without ever needing to have that, hey, we got to sit down and we got to figure out this sex thing. Like you're just going to be setting yourself up for success from the very beginning.
Yeah, it just becomes part of your normal conversation. You don't need to set time just for that. What do you think about scheduling sex? Is that the ultimate libido killer?
That's always a big question. People want to know. So we are fans of scheduling sex.
Okay.
As long as you do it the right way.
Because there's definitely many wrong ways to do it that can probably be more harmful to your relationship than good.
A lot of us think about scheduling sex and we imagine, we have to put it in our calendar. We're signing a contract, this guarantee that we're going to do it. And we feel this sense of dread around it. Like, oh God, Wednesday's coming. I'm going to have to do it. So if you schedule it that way, that is not going to be fun. And, having sex, forcing yourself to have sex to meet some sort of quota, that's not going to be fun. But I think scheduling can be done in a very different sort of way. So I love to walk people back to thinking about the early stages in your relationship. So Xander and I met on a Saturday. What did we do? We scheduled a date for Monday.
Right.
We tried to schedule a date for Sunday, didn't work out. So we scheduled a real one for Monday.
We scheduled a date for Wednesday. We scheduled a date for Friday. Once we started having sex with each other, there was a pretty clear understanding that when we were scheduling a date, like sex was going to happen on that.
Yeah.
And when I was back in those times, like I was excited about that scheduled time. I was looking forward to it. I was anticipating it. I was getting myself all worked up I'm going to see him tonight. And so it's the same sort of thing. We were scheduling time together. So it's not that all of a sudden now it takes so much more effort to be intimate, but it's that our attitude about that effort has changed.
Yeah.
So if we can think about having fun scheduling it, that can make all the difference in the world. And one super practical thing that people could do right away with this is change the word. A lot of us don't like schedule. It does just make me think of our to-do list.
It does sound bad.
Say it's a date night. You're going to have a date night instead. Or maybe there's some sort of cute inside joke between the two of you that you can say like, it's our, special day.
Our 360 review.
Yeah, but
that
we just
sounds real sexy.
We love encouraging people to plan for intimacy because the reality is our lives are busy.
Yeah.
And if we don't make a plan for something, it's likely not going to happen. And most of us are really prioritizing work and chores and other responsibilities over quality time with our partner.
Yeah.
So if we can take that approach of, you're just as important to me as the other appointments that I have on my calendar. I want to carve out time to be with you. Then that's going to have a totally different vibe to it.
And another really good word swap is you can say, let's schedule or let's plan intimacy rather than sex. Because I think when you use the word sex, especially in male-female relationships, we tend to assume that sex means intercourse, which can feel like, a lot to commit to, or it can feel like a high bar. We always like to say that, we think sex can really be any type of intimate activity. There's no definition of, sex has to be intercourse. So, when Vanessa and I say schedule sex, we're meaning scheduling any type of physical intimacy, but it can be really helpful for, you to break whatever association you have with that, to say, let's schedule intimacy. Let's have an intimacy date. And that way you're not thinking, I have to perform. I have to commit to this. I have to guarantee this.
I really like that because I'm 2 years in with my partner and I can already see it's not like, even take sex aside, but just even scheduling time. It's like in the week, we'll just watch TV and I'll be doing work and, it just, then you fall asleep on the couch. It just makes it so easy to not have anything because you're just so comfortable. But we've actually talked about scheduling okay, Tuesday will be the day that we're doing a date night, even if we don't leave the house. So this is the same idea. And I really like that. I think it resonates a lot.
Yeah, for too many of us, our quality time has turned into we're both on our phones scrolling through Instagram and TikTok while we're watching Netflix and nobody's paying attention to anything and certainly not to each other.
Yes.
So we think it's very important for couples to be intentional about spending quality time together. It's just so easy for us to get sucked into the couch routine.
Totally.
But we need to have those moments that feel special and that remind us of why we fell in love with each other in the first place. And we didn't fall in love, the Monday, Wednesday, Friday dates, those were not sit on the couch watching Netflix on phones.
Never.
We fell in love because we were doing fun stuff together.
And that's when you want to have sex, right? Not when you're half asleep on the couch.
You're barely checking your phones because you're so busy enjoying each other and discovering each other.
Before we keep going on this topic, let's take a quick break.
This episode is brought to you by Drizzly. Culture, society. On every street and around every bend lies a world positively overflowing with both. But sometimes we can all use a night in, removed from the endless spiral of chaos and absolute nonsense that waits outside our doors. And for those nights, there's Drizzly, the #1 app for alcohol delivery. With Drizzly, you can shop local stores and compare prices on the biggest selection of beer, wine, and spirits. Then get your favorite drinks delivered to your door in under 60 minutes, all from the comfort of your couch. Because society is great, but it doesn't have your couch, and it's windy out. And you forgot your jacket. And oh my God, look at that line to that place. Are you serious? So download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com today. Have you ever thought about how much better dating would be if you had a whole army of people supporting you along the way? We know that dating can be frustrating and lonely, but it can also feel fulfilling and fun. Have you recently decided you want to make some changes to your love life? Maybe you've recently re-entered the dating scene. Maybe you've gone on one too many dates that went nowhere. Or maybe you're just ready to take your current relationship to the next level. That is exactly why we created the Sounding Board, a true extension of our podcast that delivers a personalized experience, which includes monthly office hours where you can drop in and chat with us about anything, weekly sound-offs with guided discussions, and regular virtual happy hours. Allow Julie and I to become your dating Sherpas to provide real-time guidance and wisdom in a more intimate way so we can all navigate dating and relationships together. Join the Sounding Board today by going to dateablepodcast.com/sounding board. Again, that's dateablepodcast.com/sounding board. You mentioned that there's always going to be mismatched sex drive in a partnership. So someone's always technically getting rejected, right? Quote unquote. Someone's saying, no, I'm too tired on this. How do you advise couples, like the person on the receiving end, how would someone handle rejection? How should rejection be done differently?
Our favorite tip for this is that when you are turning your partner down for sex, to give them a specific reason and tie that into how you would like to show up during sex with them. So we've all heard like, oh, I'm too tired, I have a headache. And that feels kind of like a fake excuse, right? But if I were to say to Xander, like, I appreciate that you initiated. I am so exhausted from this day that I'm just worried that I'm not going to be able to be present with you in the way that I really want to be so that we can have fun and have a great experience. Could we try again tomorrow or something like that? Like when I tie it to, I'm not going to be able to show up in the way that I want it to, I'm making it really clear to him that it's about having an enjoyable experience, not just about like, oh, I have a headache and I don't want to.
And then like a bonus thing you can do on top of that, if you're open to it, is offer something different. Like I'm not up for sex. I'm not up for intercourse or whatever it is that's being initiated. I'm not up for that, but I would like to feel some connection with you, because the reality is we have sex to feel connected with each other. So, would you be open to we snuggle on the couch for a couple of minutes
I love that.
before bed, or we go on a walk together? Because I think that the rejection, it can kind of be a double whammy, because it's like, okay, they're turning me down for sex, and then it's awkward and like we don't have any opportunity for connection. So it's like I'm being turned down for sex and connection. And so, can we pivot that into, hey, here's why I'm not up for it. It has nothing to do with you. How about we do, something else that's going to feel good? Maybe it won't feel as good, but it will feel a hell of a lot better than sitting there awkward and like, oh, I guess I'm just going to go back to my phone.
Yeah.
I think that's so key, though. It's kind of like actually reminds me of early dating, right? When someone has to cancel, when you offer that next day to do something or an alternative, it's such a better outcome than just being like, oh, yeah, I need to reschedule and then just never doing anything.
So another practical tip that people can do, that we've done this in our own relationship, is if one of us is going to say no to sex, then we sort of have this agreement that if I say no, I've got like 48 hours to initiate sex with Xander.
I like
again.
that.
So it doesn't have to be like a commitment. I'm not going to get in trouble if I don't do it.
That's good.
But it's this recognition that, hey, Xander initiated and I said no. He was vulnerable. He's now having to deal with a little bit of feeling of rejection. And so I'm going to show him, you're important to me. Our sex life is important to me. I'm going to take on that role of being vulnerable and initiating something with you and reminding you that sex is important to me too.
Well, that's lovely, because then you're saying not today, but I still want to be intimate with you and I still want to enjoy this experience with you. So I like this offering up this other alternative. You could be like, not today, but do you want to get choked? Like, is that an option? Just kidding. I know a few friends who are in very low sex drive relationships. And they're constantly kind of like asking me, do you think it's because they have the same sex drive with their partner, which is no sex drive or low sex drive? They ask me, like, do you think there's a problem? But they don't feel like it's a problem in their relationship.
I don't think there's any one amount of sex that we should all be having. If that couple feels like, yeah, we're happy with having it infrequently, or we're in a season of life where it's just not a big priority to us, as long as that couple is communicating with each other and they're both on board with it, I think that's totally fine. That is a part of life sometimes. So I think the key is to make sure that you're having that conversation repeatedly. Yeah. So maybe it's, let's check in again in 6 months and see if anything has changed.
Yeah, I think the mistake a lot of couples make is, they might check in at one point in time. Let's say they're both in a really busy season of life. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, we're both cool with this. But then 6 months later, one partner just assumes, okay, yeah, we're just continuing on like that. And the other partner's like, hey, I'm feeling different, but like, what do we do? And it's those moments where we're not communicating about it or not acknowledging it, that it's so easy to start creating stories in our mind of like, oh, well, they must not be into me anymore. There must be something wrong. Whereas the other partner's just like, hey, we talked about this. I thought we were good.
Well, that's why sex is such like the barometer for so much more, right? And there's so much like of our own personal ties to it and self-worth. How do you go about actually having these conversations, like logistically? Like, do you do this like after sex, before sex, in the middle of the afternoon when sex is not on the table? Like, what's the logistics look like?
In each of the conversations in sex talks, we talk specifically about when and how to have that conversation. We want it to be really clear for people because it is very different. So something for the acknowledgement conversation, you can have those kinds of conversations really at any time. And like for Xander and I, this has turned into flirting for us. So we'll bring up sex at a random time during the day. We'll make like a little sexual joke or an innuendo. We'll recall a favorite memory. And it just feels like this way that we keep that tension alive between the two of us. But let's contrast that with something like pleasure. If you want to talk to your partner about something that you're wanting differently in the bedroom, then that's a conversation we recommend having outside of the bedroom, completely separate from when you've had sex, because it is so easy for a partner to take that personally. So if you were to just have sex and then you're telling your partner, actually, I don't love that move that you're doing, your partner's going to be more sensitive to it. So that one is a different time.
What about, we can talk about sex, but there's also sexual talking, like dirty talk.
Yeah.
How can couples introduce dirty talk into their sex lives?
And like, do you want that first,
do you
just do it?
What is dirty talk to you, and what words are off limits?
That fits into conversation 5, exploration. So we have this great exercise in the chapter that gives you this huge list. It's like a sexual bucket list of all, like not all, but a huge list of things that you could try in the bedroom. And it's this really fun exercise where you get to fill it out separately and then talk to each other and compare your answers. So dirty talk is on that list. So the list is just a great way to kind of, you get to have these conversations, but you're sort of blaming it on the book. You're like, we did this exercise.
This
now
book
we have
made
to
me do
download
it.
about it. So that's a great opportunity to check in with each other about, is dirty talk something you like? Do you want to do a little bit more of it? Should we explore it?
In terms of dirty talk, we actually have a Dirty Talk 101 guide that we sell, because I think dirty talk is a very misunderstood thing. I think some people do it without any issues. It comes very natural to them. But I think a lot of us get really in our heads about dirty talk. We have an idea that it's supposed to be a certain way. There's only these very specific words that we say. We have to sound like a porn star or whatever it is. And the reality is that dirty talk, it can be totally unique to you. Like, you have your own voice, your own words that certain words that you like, certain words that you don't like. And what we do in that guide is we really guide people through identifying your own authentic dirty talk voice and figuring out, okay, I like these words for these body parts. I don't like these words for these body parts. Here are ways that I can start stringing these together so that it doesn't feel like, oh, I just have to show up as this totally different person. Like, it should be something that's totally authentic to you and just a natural part of the experience, rather than tonight we're doing dirty talk, but tomorrow we're not.
I feel like I need your guide, because I feel like I'm always super awkward, and I feel like I'm saying things that don't feel like true to myself. So I will get that guide. Perfect.
I've never dirty talked and not laughed after. It just feels so silly to me.
We have exercises in the guide for how to get
it all. You have it all.
We've got it all. Yeah, we just love like breaking down the parts of sex that we all feel like we should be good at already, and showing you like, it's okay. We've got tons of fun tips and techniques, and we'll guide you through it all.
So a lot of our listeners, aren't in relationships. And I love what you said earlier, Xander, that, this can be a way to learn more about your compatibility by having these conversations. I feel like, though, it can be a little tricky sometimes with someone that you don't know well, of like, how do you even broach this in a way that they're gonna feel like you're not just like looking to hook up and that's all you want, or basically what's a way that makes them receptive when you don't really know how they operate fully?
I got a great first question for you. You can just ask that person, how do you feel talking about sex? How comfortable do you feel talking about sex? So you're not bringing up some like, tell me your kinkiest fantasy, where then the person's like, dude, we're on our first date. Like, leave me alone.
But if you did it in that voice, that'd be really hot.
In the voice too. Please. But it's still like giving you this opportunity to talk about sex as a more general topic and see, what comes up for that person. Another option could be like, tell me what your experience was like getting the talk from from your parents.
I like that.
I like that.
It's going around it a little bit. It's not as a direct of a question, but
it
it's
gives
still
you an opportunity to bond over probably
you're
had very awkward
Yeah,
experiences.
sex ed. You could talk about
but it
sex
might
ed.
give you that sense of maybe the person says it was so awkward, but I've put a lot of work into becoming more comfortable talking about it myself, or I realized I want to have a very different kind of conversation with my future children or something like that. So it gives you a way to talk about sex without going into the logistical details of it yet.
And I think if you were to ask that question of just like, how do you feel talking about sex, it allows you to then also bring up how you feel about having sex, like relative to dating and how many dates you go on, so that it's not this sort of like, feeling each other out like, oh, okay, are we having a longer kiss? Like, oh, do we go back upstairs now? I don't know.
Do they want to initiate?
Yeah, of course it's going to feel awkward the first time you ask that question, but the more we lean into doing those awkward things, the less awkward they feel. And if you think about the outcome of that awkwardness, could be that you're able to really clearly state how you feel about sex in a new relationship and gauge how comfortable that person is, how sexually compatible you might be without there being this elephant in the room of like, okay, how long are we waiting without ever talking about it?
And on the opposite side of the spectrum, for people who've been in long-term relationships, maybe like 5+ years and never really talked about sex, how would you advise them to start this conversation?
With that acknowledgement conversation.
Same.
So with starting to share some of their favorite sexual memories with each other so that you create that foundation of talking about it in a positive and neutral way. And I want to normalize, we have talked to so many people who have said we've been together years, decades, and we've never had a conversation about sex. So we want couples to know, like, it's okay. We're still going to ease you into it, but we still want to start on that positive note where we just start talking about some favorite memories together.
Yeah, I mean, so here's what you could do right now. Like, you could pull out your phone, you could think about what is your favorite sexual memory with your partner, or just what's a really good memory that comes up. Write that down and just be like, hey, this memory just randomly came to mind. It made me smile. It made me think about you. Just wanted to let you know.
I love that.
And see what happens.
No matter what stage of a relationship, I think everyone should do that today. Like, that's such a great way to bring it up.
You're not making any complaints. You're not trying to solve anything. It's not a we need to talk kind of thing. It's just giving your partner this experience of, oh, this can be fun and playful, and we can talk about it openly without it having to be a problem or a scary thing.
And like, they're thinking about me.
Yeah. I know.
Like, doesn't
my
like
partner's
that.
thinking about me.
I mean, this conversation has been so wonderful. Thank you both for being here. But I think like when we went into this conversation, I feel like there's this connotation, I guess this will lead me to my takeaways, is that we have to talk about sex when there's something wrong. And what I've gathered today here is that is the furthest from the case, like the actual truth of when you should talk about sex. The other thing that really struck home for me on this conversation is we always talk about other parts of the relationship where we're not aligned, like when one person is ready to get engaged before the other, or take a step into a relationship, move in together, whatever it may be. But we don't ever talk about like not being perfectly aligned with our sexual experience. And it's just another facet of the relationship. It's the same way that you would kind of go about, I like what you said earlier of like, it's neither of our problems. It's us as a couple and something that we're working towards together. So even though it feels scary to talk about sex because it's so personal, how does it just become another aspect of your relationship that you're finding a middle ground in finding something that works for the two of you? So I think like that's definitely been my outcome of this conversation, is that there's never too early of a time to talk about it, and it doesn't have to be so scary.
I'm so glad that that's the takeaway, because that's exactly the takeaway we want people to have when they read our book, Sex Talks.
And that's the other takeaway is get the book, Sex Talks.
Yeah,
But also along the same lines is it's never too early, it's never too late. You can be having these conversations throughout your relationship. But what I'm taking away is we shouldn't treat sex in its own silo. It's part of the relationship just as much as we talk about family planning, where we're going to buy that next house, and sex. Our sex life is part of all of that. We can normalize that just by talking about it. It could be that simple. It's mind-boggling to me. Like, it can be that simple. You just have to insert it into everyday conversation.
Insert is the perfect word.
Insert
to insert it. That's the takeaway from the
always
episode.
insert. And I think the second biggest takeaway I have is it's good to have a conversation with your partner about the ideal sex life you want to build together. Because I do feel like, at least for me, and I'm sure in my previous relationships, I was working towards a sex life that I thought my partner wanted us to have without talking about it. It's like, oh, I bet he would like it if we did this and that. Probably the best opportunity is to talk about it and say, yeah, in a week, how much should we be having sex? What kind of sex do we want to be having? How do we want to enjoy ourselves in the bedroom? It's a great way to open up that conversation. So that's another major takeaway. And I'm so appreciating that just even us four talking about sex is already normalizing the conversation.
Yeah.
And the more people can share this episode with their friends, share the book Sex Talks with their friends, and you've said it on your podcast too, the more we can share this with the people around us, it normalizes a conversation and takes away the shame from sex. If you gift this book to your friend, acknowledge this to your friend that you also have sex and you like to talk about sex. So it's a great way to, again, normalize this conversation. So thank you for paving the way for that. If people want to get a hold of the book, where do they go?
We have all the information about it at sextalksbook.com. So get all the links to purchase it, all kinds of extra stuff. So sextalksbook.com.
Awesome. And we'll also link it in the show notes.
Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you being willing to have these conversations with us, because it's something that we all have to do together to work to overcome the shame, to normalize completely normal things. So we appreciate you guys opening up that opportunity for us.
Yeah, and Yue and I both have a homework assignment for tonight.
Yes.
Acknowledgement. That's the first step.
Canceling my dinner plans. Honestly, we got to have these conversations. We got to normalize the conversation. But if everyone is having the sex life that they want in this world, there'd be a lot less crime, okay? A lot less violence, a lot less riffraff. We are saving the world one bedroom at a time.
Yeah, we are.
One orgasm at a time.
We truly are. So thank you again for being on our show. For all of our listeners, if you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Instagram at Dateable Podcast. And you can also find us on Apple Podcasts by giving us a rating and review. 5 stars, something nice, goes a long way. It really helps us get wonderful guests like Xander and Vanessa with us. And we hope to, again, continue the conversation. Did you learn something from this episode? Have you gotten the book? What did you learn from the book? Let us know by tagging us on social media at Dateable Podcast. And we're going to wrap up this episode. Stay dateable! The Dateable Podcast is part of the Frolic Media Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Dateable Podcast and visit dateablepodcast.com for access to all the episodes and our premium programs. Also, make sure to subscribe today if you haven't already on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform, so you are the first to get all the latest episodes. And most importantly, stay dateable.